Hey, it's Lou, and here's the thing. Airbnb has changed the way we travel. More than ever before, houses, apartments, and spare bedrooms are seen as a viable alternative to hotel rooms. Tourists get to live like a local. Locals get to turn their extra space into extra income. In the process, Airbnb has grown into the second most valuable startup in America, trailing only Uber. It's an amazing success story. But are its unintended consequences ruining cities? Roughly 60% of all guests who've ever booked on Airbnb are millennials. That's a generation that loves travel, unique experiences, and personal connections. Airbnb delivers all three. Srikanth Baldona, a professor of hospitality business management at the University of Delaware, told me that Airbnb introduced lower price points into the accommodation market, allowing cash-strapped and college debt-ridden young folks to find an alternative to pricey hotel rooms. These hotel rooms, by the way, tend to be clustered in specific areas of a city, often in the business district. Airbnbs are more spread out, allowing folks to experience neighborhoods that are off traditional tourism maps. Airbnb likes to point out that this generates revenue for local mom and pop shops as opposed to just Starbucks in hotel lobbies or tourist traps in Times Square. In terms of personal connection, Baldona told me you could see this in the reviews people leave of Airbnb. They tend to use language like neighborhood, community, and host, whereas hotel guests use more sterile words like staff, room, and lobby. This aligns with something the CEO of Airbnb has said, that hotels provide mass-produced hospitality. The listings on Airbnb, in theory, have more charm, more personality, more stains on the carpet and pictures of strangers on the mantle. Okay, so this is from a guest perspective. From a host perspective, Airbnb is an opportunity to generate some extra cash, a sort of side hustle built into your house. And that option, or safety net, has actually made homes more valuable. That's according to a recent study looking at the US housing market. Other studies have come to similar conclusions. Okay, so resetting here. Good for travelers, good for homeowners, bad for renters. As a prelude, Airbnb makes much of its one host, one home policy, which basically means people are listing the place they live in, a spare bedroom, or their place while they're on vacation. These are referred to as owner-occupied homes. Davide Proserpio, a marketing professor at USC and co-author of that study I just mentioned, told me owner-occupied listings have virtually no impact on rents. However, the problem, critics argue, is the professionalization of Airbnb. Basically, that means it's not owner-occupiers offering up their homes, but entrepreneurs who buy second, third, fourth, 10th housing units specifically to list them as rentals for tourists. Proserpio's study found that 1 in 8 potential homes are being listed on Airbnb instead of being available on the long-term rental market. Another way of saying that, every 8th home is being offered to a tourist and not a permanent resident. And it's a much tighter ratio in cities, particularly New York and San Francisco.
Turn them into rooms for tourists who are here 1 or 2 nights. That has to end because it has encroached on our supply of affordable housing, which is diminishing daily.
A bit of economics 101 here. As the supply of rental housing goes down, the rent goes up. And consider the vicious cycle. Airbnb makes rents higher and home prices higher. So as a renter, you're paying more every month, and that means you can't save as much. Plus, the house you eventually hope to buy is getting more and more expensive. Keep in mind, many renters are prohibited from listing their places on Airbnb by their lease agreements with their landlords, so they can't get in on that sweet sharing economy action. And also keep in mind, renters tend to be poorer than homeowners, plus minorities tend to be renters. So there's a whole socioeconomic racial component to this as well. And final point on this, the professionalization of Airbnb, which has given rise to a cottage industry of property managers and cleaning services, isn't just leading to higher rents, it also represents a move towards mass-produced hospitality, the thing the CEO of Airbnb criticized. And in this way, Airbnb is losing a little bit of its soul and straying from the original story. The founders rented out air mattresses in their San Francisco apartment. That's how the company was born. Now, All this has made Airbnb a big, rich target for groups that are worried about being priced out of their neighborhoods so greedy landlords can profit off of tourists, or folks who are concerned that their communities are being turned into playgrounds for out-of-towners. These groups have found an ally in Airbnb's arch rival. That's the hotel industry and its well-connected lobbying operation.
Airbnb only cares about one thing, and it's not us.
One of their big gripes: hotels face regulations like zoning laws, and they have to charge taxes to their customers, but Airbnb doesn't. I spoke to Christopher Nolte, Airbnb's head of public affairs America, and he conceded that Airbnb initially didn't prioritize tax collection. But a few years ago, the fastly growing company realized that it needed to start collecting the same types of taxes that hotels did. And since then, it's brought in nearly $500 million and handed it over to governments. Airbnb, he added, actually wants to be regulated. Regulation is a sign of being accepted, of being mainstreamed. So the company has entered into partnerships with municipalities across the world, basically saying, hey, we exist, people like us. How can we build a legal framework that takes us out of a gray area and puts some money in government coffers? It's important to realize Airbnb is likely to go public in the not so distant future. Wall Street doesn't like uncertainty or regulatory question marks. Maybe Airbnb playing nice with the tax man is part of its maturing, its evolution into a publicly traded company. Speaking of regulation, when I asked Nolte about those professional Airbnbers, the ones that are contributing the most to the increase in rents, he said, A, that's only a small percentage of total listings, and B, if local governments want to ban that practice, Airbnb will support it. In places that have already passed legislation to stop people with multiple listings, Airbnb has complied and kicked offenders off the site. To be fair, critics have claimed that Airbnb hasn't been aggressive enough in doing that, and the website itself was redesigned in a way that encourages multiple listings. I also asked Nolte about the idea that Airbnb is contributing to rising rents. He objected to that. But here's what I found interesting. One of the authors of that study I keep referencing, Professor Proserpio, said, yeah, there's empirical evidence that Airbnb pushes up rents. In fact, his isn't the only study to conclude that. But it's a really tiny bump, just a small reason among many contributing to rising rents. And instead of looking at Airbnb as an enemy, something to be stopped, we should see it as a new innovation, a sharing economy advancement that's brought value to homeowners the world over and has promoted tourism in overlooked places that can benefit from that type of economic activity. Professor Baldona had a similar take. There are pros and cons, and perhaps the cons are exacerbated by governments that always struggle to regulate and tax disruptive businesses. Baldona added, there's a lot of passion around this subject, a lot of venom towards Airbnb, because housing hits a special nerve. It's tied up with people's self-worth, their financial security, their identity. So there's a ton of sensitivity connected to the topic. Plus, let's be honest, everyone hates tourists, specifically tourists in their neighborhood. Out-of-towners who create long lines at the coffee shop, obstruct the sidewalk with their suitcases, and take selfies right where you are trying to walk. It's super annoying, and doubly so when they're drunk, loud, and slow-moving. But you know what? I've been that guy in other places, so I'm gonna try to cut everyone else some slack. Still, I reserve the right to complain about rising rents. Okay, I'm gonna go live my life.
There's nothing more millennial than broadcasting yourself on social media and avocado on toast.
So your children survived the dangerous Tide Pod challenge, and now they're all wildly snorting condoms.